What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another 60 feet 6 inches, your fantasy baseball home over at fakepigskin.com. I'm your host, Kyle Robert. You can follow me on Twitter at NotoriousKRO. With me today, once again, it's Ben Rolfe. What's up, Ben?
Not much, Carl, but it's a good week for sport. The Six Nations, that's rugby, started over here this weekend. So I've had that on the TV today. Another game tomorrow, of course. Then we've got the Super Bowl. We've got some cricket going on. We've got the Winter Olympics starting next week. It's a great time for sport at the moment, and we're getting closer to baseball season all the time.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, with Super Bowl's coming up, it's kind of entering a dead zone for sports. Football's ending. Basketball will be there, which I love, and March Madness is about a month away. So excited about that. Couldn't give two craps about the Olympics, to be honest. It's like I'll probably turn it on and watch some curling because why not. But other than that, I'm pretty much out. I did find myself watching the Premier League of Darts the other night, and
Okay.
that was an experience.
That's yeah, let's not start the debate on whether that's a sport or not. Let's be
Yeah,
honest. That's
no, I think
it's a
I think there's sports and I think there's competitive activities, and if it's something you could do with a beer in your hand, I don't know that it's a sport, but we'll figure that out. Okay, but we are here to talk second base. If you missed it, we talked first base, we talked our studs at the position, we talked sleepers, guys that are outside of the top 8 or so that could make the top 10, top 5. And today we're doing that same thing with second base. So we'll start with our top 8, and because we and Ben were kind of discussing, we're not just going to pick 10 just because everybody does 10. We look for where the kind of drop off is. Where does it go from guys you really like, guys you can rely on, to, it's kind of a mixed bag of, okay, what do you need? Power, speed, what, this or that. Do you need a little more average? Do you need a little more of this? So for second base, much like first, we found ourselves kind of cutting it off at 8. So for the consensus rankings, which we got from fantasypros.com, Ben took, or they took Jose Altuve, Jose Ramirez, Brian Dozier, Dee Gordon, Daniel Murphy, Robinson Cano, Jonathan Shoup, and DJ LeMahieu. Ben it has a similar with a few different ones, and if you're reading Fake Pigskin, obviously his rankings are going up for points and roto. Updates will be coming soon, as well as we will have a rankings tab where myself and Ben and maybe some other people we can finagle into doing some rankings. We'll have some stuff up there for you guys to check out. But Ben, Altuve, D. Gordon, Jose Ramirez, Robinson Cano, Jonathan Scope, Brian Dozier, Daniel Murphy, DJ LeMahieu. So kind of the same names, a little bit different order. I guess Ben, Jose Altuve. This is our guy, right? This is the Paul Goldschmidt of second baseman, a guy that is clear heads and tails above everybody else, and is in the conversation for the first 2, 3, 4 picks in most fantasy baseball drafts.
I'd actually go as far as to say that Altuve is further ahead of the field than Goldschmidt is. Like with Votto, you can make the case that he's close to Goldschmidt. Like you
Yeah.
can take Joey Votto in the first round. You could even make the case that he could go near the top 6 because he's just so consistent. With Altuve, there's just no one like that. I should just say that Carl read out my rankings. There's a slight change to what I published. LeMahieu has come up to 8th. I sort of got my numbers wrong on Starling Castro and Whit Merrifield, so I've moved them down. Um, but we'll talk about him in a little while. Um, the thing is with Altuve, he's just there's nothing he's weak at. He does everything. He is a true five category player, and that's so great. I mean, the one thing you might say is a little bit weak at is a little bit weak on the RBI front. He only had 81 last year, but I think he's going to hit maybe 3 in the lineup this year for the consistent time. And so I think you'll see a more even balance, about 95, 95, 100 kind of things for runs, RBIs. I think we'll see more balance. We'll see a true 5 category stud. And I really, with sort of a projection of 20 plus home runs and 30-ish steals, you could make a great case for taking him the number 1 overall pick. You really could.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. I'd definitely take Trout, but Altuve at number 2, I think is really nice. Like you mentioned, anytime you can get 20 plus homers and 30 plus steals, like with an average of 330, 340. Like this dude's been crushing it. Um, Obviously on a really good team, really deep lineup. They should be really good once again. So yeah, I'm with you. I think it's Altuve and then everyone else. So I guess my question for you is, I think there's a couple names: Jose Ramirez, Dee Gordon, Brian Dozier, Robinson Cano. I mean, depending on how you kind of break it down. For number two, I guess you landed on Dee Gordon. What puts him there for you, and kind of what stands out?
It's kind of a case of prioritizing. Like, I don't expect any of these guys to be taken earlier than the second round. I expect that's kind of where you'll start seeing most of these guys fly off the board. I could quite happily accept anybody's reasoning for taking anybody from Gordon through Murphy as in my rankings as their number two. I mean, it's just a tier of guys that you can just lump together. They all can contribute different things. I went for Dee Gordon based on the rarity of steals. He can offer you, well, in the last 2 seasons he's offered 30 steals in half a year and 60 in a full year. We spoke about him a few weeks ago on the pod, and we sort of talked about whether or not his steals were enough to make up for the lack of home runs and RBIs. And you can find home runs and RBIs elsewhere. What you can't find is 60 steals with a 308 average. I mean, you can find 60 steals somewhere else in Billy Hamilton, but you're getting that at a 250 average. And you can find steal specialists, but you're not necessarily getting it at that average. And so 60 steals can be the difference between you finishing middle of steals and winning it. And I think if you can lock that up early, you can then spend your rounds 3, 4, 5 focusing on your other categories or focusing on your pitching. You don't have to worry about then chasing guys who are perennially overdrafted, such as Billy Hamilton. I think Dee Gordon has the runs and the average to back up where he's being drafted. I don't think the same can be said for the likes of Billy Hamilton.
Yeah, and I think going to Seattle, hitting with Nelson Cruz and Robinson Cano and Kyle Seager, like that lineup will be real nice. In a head-to-head league, like just knowing you have those weekly steals totals penciled in is great. Or like if you're in a roto league, you go, okay, I need 200, 250. It's always good to go back through your roto leagues and kind of see what the best numbers at each category was, so you kind of have an idea of what you need to get in each category to have a reasonable shot at winning. And say 250, whatever it is, if you can pencil in 60 steals right off the bat, or even if you want to be a little more conservative and say 50, but I mean, you look at his 3 last full seasons, 64, 58, 60, and as you mentioned, 2016, when he played about half the season, he had 30, so he's on pace for another 60. So, I mean, 60 stolen bases is very reasonable for Dee Gordon. Ben, I guess for you, is he a guy, we kind of talked, you kind of mentioned you like a few names kind of in this range. Is he a guy that if you draft him, you could consider drafting one of the other second basemen and potentially moving him to outfield once he gains eligibility there?
Yeah, I think so. I think it depends on your league settings. I think it's the same argument you would make for the 1 or 2 pick. If you're playing in a 3 outfielder roto league, that sort of moves Altuve over Trout and means that Dee Gordon is more likely to be your second baseman, because there's enough outfielders to fill that sort of 30 to 36 outfielders if you're only playing in a 3 outfielder league. But if you're playing in a standard 5 outfielder roto league, I can definitely make the case if one of the guys in the next 7 drops, for getting them, or waiting, getting like a LeMahieu a little bit later who can give you solid average. That kind of tactic's definitely there. Just with what you were saying about going back and looking at categories, what I do is I go back to my previous year or 2 and I write down how many steals won it, but also how many steals got me, say, 3rd place and 6th place, and then what was bottom. So I've got benchmarks to aim for. So I know that, say, for example, 200 steals wins it, but 140 gets me 6th. I know then that someone like Dee Gordon can be the guy who puts me over the top, kind of thing. And that's how I do it. So I try and aim to get that 6th place at everything, knowing that at the very least then I'm going to be mid-table early on with a chance to challenge. But then what I do is I look, okay, so really I'm aiming at least for the top 3. What do I do to get in the top 3? And then you can readjust and reevaluate. And when you've got those faced with those decisions, do I need another 30 home runs, or do I look at look at reinforcing a guy, get a guy who's going to get me some runs. You can say, well, actually, I've got enough home runs already to be at third, second position in my league. But what I'm lacking is I'm lacking average. I'm going to be at least 20 points short on average. So it really helps you balance it on draft day, because the way you win roto leagues to try and finish consistently top 3 or 4 in all categories, and then try and win a couple as well. That's the best way to win a roto league. It's not boom or bust. You don't want to win 4 and lose one, win 4, lose 1, and then finish mid-table in 6th. That's not the way to do it. You really need to dominate, because roto leagues tend to drop off as the year goes on. Teams tend to lose interest a little bit at the bottom end, and those points can be picked up quite freely by your opponents. So you want to try and win as many categories as you can. So I always aim for third in every category, because I know then I'll win a few and just drop below that in a few, but that's a good place to aim for.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. Let's talk about a couple of the names behind Gordon. Jose Ramirez, currently year number 3. I guess for me, I do have some questions. Obviously, this guy has been improving each of the past 3 years. His production last year was incredible. 29 homers, 83 RBIs, hitting almost 320. But the power did take a sizable bump last year. Ben, I guess, are you concerned that there's some kind of middling there where it settles maybe around 18 or 20 instead of, closer to 30 in terms of home run totals?
Yeah, and I think that's why in my rankings he's third, because my projections have him for 19 home runs and 20 stolen bases. So I've averaged both of the last 2 years. What we can count on is a decent average. I mean, I might even be underestimating his average a bit at sort of 300, but I think we've seen now the last 2 years he backed up 2016 with 27 in the 17 in the average. We saw the jump a couple of years ago in steals, but it like at least we'd seen that in the minors. This power jump is definitely interesting. It's something I want to go and have a look at more with Ramirez, and it would make an interesting article near the year is how his fly ball tendencies changed. But just a quick glance, and I can see his home run to fly ball rate shot up 8%. So I don't think that's sustainable. So I do expect some of it to drop back. And when I say it jumped up 8%, it jumped up from 6%. So he more than doubled his home run to fly ball rate. So that might be a shift in how the Indians are doing things. We saw Francisco Lindor go nuts at the plate last year, and I'm sure we'll talk about him in our shortstop rankings. But it's hard. I think there will be a middling off, but I think he'll do enough around that. I think he offers enough across all 5 categories where I think even worst case scenario, he's going to offer you top 5 sort of talent, as long as we don't see a major regression. But I don't think there's indicators of that at the moment. I think what we're looking at here is if he just underperforms with home runs, he can still do enough to make him a top 5 second baseman.
Yeah, and I guess for you, is 2020 with a above 300 average better than, say, Brian Dozier, who will hit you 35, maybe 40 home runs, close to 100 RBIs, but will hit 260, 270 and steal maybe a handful, 4, 5, 6 bases?
Well, Dozier's actually been double figures the last few years in steals. I mean, 14, 21, 12, 18, 16. So Dozier can do it, but what worries me with Dozier is he's at the moment supposed to be at the top of that lineup, and that really hurts his RBI totals. So all of a sudden now he goes from being a 4 category contributor to maybe a 3.5. You could give him half credit for average and half credit for RBIs. All of a sudden he just falls that little bit behind Ramirez. And early on in drafts, 3rd, 4th round, I'm looking to balance my categories as much as possible so that I've got the flexibility when the draft board falls my way in round 6, 7, 8. So I don't want to be stuck in a situation where, say, JD Martinez is still unsigned and people are not drafting him. We get to round 5 and he's still on the board, but because I've loaded up on power early on, I don't feel like I can put the nail in the coffin and go for Martinez. I feel like I need to go for a different category at that point. By taking Ramirez, you set yourself up to be able to go anywhere later in the draft. If Billy Hamilton drops, grab those steals. If a great average guy drops, get him. If JD Martinez is there, you can get the home runs. That's what I like about taking Ramirez early on. I know that's different to what I've said with Dee Gordon previously, but steals is a different beast to home runs in my view.
Yeah, and I guess Yeah, I guess that makes a lot of sense. I don't know. It really does seem like it's a pick your poison, find what makes the most sense to you. The Twins are actually building kind of a decent lineup, and there could be some potential, RBI opportunity. There's also been some kind of trade rumors around Dozier, just because he basically is on the last year of his contract. They haven't really talked an extension. Do you think if Dozier moves? I guess would that concern you? I mean, I know the Yankees had talked about potentially going after him. I'm sure other teams would be interested if the Twins were like, "Oh yeah, we're ready to sell Brian Dozier," or do you think he's kind of gonna be the guy he is, unless he goes to some awful park for hitting?
Yeah, that would be the downside. Say if he ends up in like San Francisco, he'd be in a decent lineup, but he'd be in a bad power park, and I would have my concerns there. Um, the Yankees would be great, but again, I still think you'll have these lineup questions. We're already debating where they're all going to hit. Like, where
Mm-hmm.
is Gary Sanchez going to hit? And I mean, when Gary Sanchez isn't in the lineup because he's having a day off or something, you might find that Dozier slips into the middle of the field. But again, all that's going to happen is then you're going to have more questions about RBI and runs. I still think he'll hit for power and steal. That's the question. Is it all depends. That you need to try and strike that balance between a good ballpark with a good lineup, but one he's going to hit in that 2, 3, 4, 5 slot, so you can maximize those runs and RBI. If he hits in the one slot, you're sacrificing your RBI, and he hits any lower than fifth, and you're sacrificing your runs. So it's a real delicate balancing act, and when you've got a tier like this that is so stacked, those small differences can be what push you down the rankings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that makes a ton of sense. Let's talk Robbie Cano. Let's talk about a guy that 2 years ago hit almost 40 home runs and 100 RBIs, and was looking, like he was in the MVP discussion. But it seems to be kind of the blip on the radar. His last five, at least in terms of home run potential, past five, 27, 14, 21, 39, and then 23. So, like, I guess in terms of what you expect from him and kind of in heading into this season, do you expect it? Where do you expect his home run number to kind of fall? And then how does his average come into play when you're thinking about where to rank him?
Yeah, it's really tough, and to just look like his ISO last year was back, oh, in 2016 was back up with what he did at the Yankees. His home run to fly ball rate was, but I think for an aging hitter who's going to be 36 come the end of this year, I don't expect to see a rebound into that 35 home run kind of range.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking that a nice middle ground would be around 26, but since he's been with the Mariners, not including 2016, he's averaged around 20, a little bit less than 20 on average. He's had 14, 21, and 23. So I do have my concerns there that he won't get over 25, but it's okay. It's not the end of the world. I think average wise, he's going to hit 285 to 290, something in that range. And in that lineup, he's going to get very close to that 100 runs, 100 RBIs. He might fall just a little bit on the short side. You might be looking closer to 190 maybe, but
Mm-hmm.
he's still going to be a valuable contributor. I just don't think he's got the upside that the likes of Ramirez and Gordon have got in terms of, I feel like those guys can still go up a bit more. I feel like Gordon, it wouldn't surprise me if we saw a 70 steal season. And again, steals are just so special. It's unfair to compare him to the others. And I feel like with Ramirez, it wouldn't shock me if we saw I don't know, another 30-20 season. It really wouldn't. And then he's that next level above because he hits for that little bit more average as well. It's really interesting. Cano is a great player, but he's kind of set just below those two for me at the moment.
So why not Daniel Murphy over Robinson Cano then? Because I'm looking, and if you want to talk projections, I'm thinking both in the mid-20s in terms of homers, both approaching 100 in terms of runs and RBIs, probably both around 185, 190, I would guess, is pretty fair. But you're getting 40 points, 50 points of batting average?
Um, it depends. A lot of projections. It's hard with Daniel Murphy because a lot of projections will take into account his 2015 and previous where he hit below 300. I've gone for sort of 315. So let's say a 25-point bump. But I think you're going to be closer to 20 home runs than 25. I think runs and RBIs, you're going to see a similar number. So I can see what you're saying. It's then becomes a case a little bit of again of picking your poison, picking what you want. Do you want that guy with that little bit more average, or the guy that could go nuts and hit the 30 home runs in
Mhm.
Robinson Cano? I can't see Daniel Murphy going that nuts,
Yeah.
but I also have some concerns over where Daniel Murphy may end up hitting. He may, with Turner, Harper, and Rendon, he may end up getting pushed a little bit down that lineup, which could just hamper that run total and just that could just tip the scales, and that's the problem there.
Yeah, and I see what you're saying. Like, if you want to have that potential for someone to hit 40 home runs or close to it, it's definitely Cano
Mm,
over Daniel Murphy. But man, I give me Murph every day. Like, I think you're gonna get a guy that hits 320, 330, and has 20 plus home runs and 180, 190 in terms of runs and RBI, um, on a good team. And I know what you're saying. Like, there's a good chance that he could be messed with in the lineup, but I still think it's some common. I think it's Turner, Murphy, Harper, Rendon, or Rendon, Harper, and then they'll back it up with what's his name, Ryan Zimmerman, and some other guys. So I don't know. Well, I guess that remains to see. And to be honest, I mean they're kind of back to back in rankings for a reason.
mm.
Um,
And they're
oh
all tiered together. So
yeah.
that's the thing here. I can't separate them by that much. If there was a separator and I thought that Murphy was a long way behind Cano, Murphy would be in my third tier,
Hmm.
probably on his own in a third tier, because there's such a big drop off after these six to DJ LeMahieu that anybody I didn't think could quite make it would drop right in there. It's games. I've seen people such as Steamer project him for as few as 120 games this year,
Yeah.
and that's a little. I feel like that's a little bit harsh on Daniel Murphy
It's okay. That's insane.
because I mean he's played 130. The lowest he's played in the last 6 years is 130. I feel like that's a little bit on the harsh side for him, but those 10 games when you're talking about this kind of rarefied air at the position, so to speak, do make a difference. And
Hmm.
so when you're looking at it that way, I just think that Cano will just play those extra few games that will just count a bit more for the runs and RBI, and will offset that average difference a little bit.
Yeah, and though we were talking about it before we recorded, and we'll be talking, deeper finds on our next episode. But we're talking about Starling Castro and how important, 80 to 100 at bats are for his counting stats and for his rankings. Because if you project him for, close to the 600, high 600s, low 700s, then he could be a guy that flirts with this top
Mm.
10. And if he's a guy that hits, in the 550, he's a guy that you probably is going to be in a middle infield or a corner infield slot if you own him at all. I guess the guy that kind of stood out to me and I wanted to pick your brain about is Jonathan Scope. This guy is very interesting. Kind of talk to me about him and where you are with him for 2018.
So again, it's kind of hard. I kind of see him a bit like Brian Dozier, just because they're kind of along the same model in terms of if everything breaks right, they can hit a little bit more. They can like scope hit 290 last year. I think that's a little bit beyond Dozier, but I also don't think 40 home runs is in Scope's wheelhouse, whereas for Dozier it is. So that's kind of where I am with him in that I feel like he's as good as Dozier in that he can give you good power but he can back it up with more average. But I don't feel like he's got the power to go for the massive 40 home run season, the season that can really make or break. I also do have some concerns about how hit or miss the Orioles tend to be on a week to week basis. That gives me a little bit of concern. But he had 197 combined runs and RBI last year. He didn't do too badly, I think. And with Trey Mancini, I think Machado has a bounce back this year. I think Adam Jones has a little bounce back as well. I think we'll see a decent total from Jonathan Scope this year. I easily could see a situation where we are talking about him next year. If he does another 30 home run, 290 average year, we talk about him as the clear number two. I
Yeah,
really do.
and he's got I'm looking at his deeper numbers. He dropped his K rate to 21.2 in 2016. He kept it at 21 again. So if he keeps it there, that walk rate, yeah, it went up 2%, but like I don't know, that's not that much, but that made the difference in walk, a 2% walk rate, keeping his strike rate down. That's what brought him up to 290. Like, would it be shocking if he's able to be around 5 or 6% in terms of walk rate? Maybe he even lowers that strikeout rate to under 21, and maybe he's a guy that should be right around 290, maybe even close to 300 in terms of average. And then if you're talking about a guy who can hit close to 30 homers with 200 between RBIs and runs and close to 300, like yeah, I'm with you. He could be a guy that is challenging for one of the top two spots, or the second spot right behind right behind Jose Altuve. Like I think there's a lot to like there, and as you mentioned, we were talking about Mancini in the first base podcast, and we're both kind of excited about what he could be this year. So if he gets better, and Adam Jones is a stud and does what he does every year, and now Jonathan Scope could be a guy, and especially at a middle infield spot where it's rare to find a guy with this kind of power and run production who could hit. I mean, that's what made Robinson Cano really valuable. That's what made Daniel Murphy really valuable, and he could be right there doing all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, currently I have him projected for 30 home runs, 180 combined runs and RBI, but I feel like my projections are always a little fraction on the low side with those when I put them together. And an average of about 280. If I up that to an average of 290, just to have a look, go for runs at 90 and RBI at 100, then all of a sudden his scoring the rank I give him, the score I give him, jumps up above that of Dee Gordon. So 100%, if he does that and backs that up this year, I think we feel like we know what like the guys like Ramirez and Gordon and Cano are going to give you. So with Scope, I feel like he's the one with the most room to grow. If you said to me, who's the guy that you're taking in the first round next year, not named Jose Altuve, I think Jonathan Scope would be the name on the lips, because another 30 home run season backed up with a close to 300 average, and you can't argue with that. If especially at middle infield, you're right. It's such a volatile situation at middle infield that it's a great asset to have.
Yeah, and when we're talking about middle infield, and you're talking about guys, it seems like there's a clear 7 or 8 guys that we really like. Are you more inclined to go after safety when you're looking at those, or do you want to shoot for upside, shoot for a guy? I mean, like guy like Cano who could hit 40 home runs, or a guy like Jonathan Scope who could challenge Jose Altuve. I mean, or are you going, okay, give me a guy that I've seen do it. Let me lock him in. Let me make this happen, and just know that I have this production.
I think when it's a guy like Robinson Cano, he's kind of so the reason he is kind of ranked above the others at 4 is because I feel like he offers the safety and the upside. I feel like we know what Cano's floor is, but we also know what Cano's upside is. So that's why he gets a little boost over these guys, because I feel like if he hits his floor, he's still going to be a top 5-ish producer. I feel like if Jonathan Scoop, Brian Dozier have a bad year, they could struggle.
Yeah.
But I feel like their upside counteracts Daniel Murphy, and the trouble with this position, we're going to talk about it in the next podcast, is once you get outside this top 8, it gets kind of crapshooty in that, like, you could find a guy who's great, you could find a guy who completely bottoms out, and that makes it tough when you're gambling on a guy like Jonathan Scoop, or I don't feel like Brian Dozier is so much of a gamble. I feel like we know what Dozier can be, but I do look for upside, definitely. I want upside, and I want upside at a position that's deep, and so I feel like there's other infield positions that are deeper that you can shoot for upside earlier in the draft on. This is one where I'm going to try and balance that upside and safety more than maybe say third base or first base, where I feel like you can at least get contributors probably off the free agency wire. That's where I'm thinking with this is just I'm going to look at the depth of my league, and if my league is semi-deep, then I'm going to probably go for upside. If it's a super deep league, I'm probably going to shoot for the Cano Murphy safety over the Scoop upside.
Yeah, and I like that. I think the Cano having kind of that safe floor makes sense, because we could see Jonathan Scope or Brian Dozier hit 215 hit 20 home runs, hit 60 RBIs, and play part time and be really annoying to own. Would you like be comfortable taking say two of these guys in the first, I don't know, 4 or 5 rounds? Like would you, if you say you took Altuve with your first pick, and then maybe in round 2, 3 took one of Gordon or Robinson Cano, or maybe even fourth round if they fall. Like, would you be comfortable kind of locking in that?
I would, as long as I felt comfortable that I wasn't going to need my middle infield spot to get steals later.
Yeah.
So,
Or if you
uh,
get Dee Gordon and then Altuve with two of your
yeah,
first 3 picks or whatever.
yeah. If I can double that up, I mean, if Dee Gordon sat there at the start of the third round, I would, and I've got Altuve, I would probably consider him and feel fairly sure. And if any of these guys have sat there towards the end of the fourth round, I'd definitely be leaning towards drafting them. But I'd want to have some guys circled on my sheet that I know I can get the categories that whatever I take these guys in, I'm going to be deficient at this stage. But at the stage 3, 4 of the draft, rounds 3, 4 of the draft, you're not drafting many 5 category players at that point. You're already starting to go positionally. Most of the 5 category guys go in the first 2 rounds. So at that point, you're making that decision anyway. So yeah, 100%. Why not? Why not send your league scrambling at second base and starting to look down the list and start seriously debating about what's Rugnedo Dor or what Starlin Castro are going to do this year? I think that's a great tactic. I think that gives you great trade position later in the year. I think it's something you really want to do. Middle infield is not massively deep at either position. They're better than they used to be, but they're not massively deep. So definitely lock up 2 positions, and at worst, you can move this guy. If you draft a shortstop, you can move this guy into your utility or your shortstop into your utility. So I'd go for it. I really would. I don't think I'd hesitate if that was the best player available at the time. That's where I would be going.
Yeah. So don't shy away from it. The last guy on your list, DJ LeMahieu. Talk to me about him and kind of why he's closer to this group than he is to the next group.
Yeah, it's because he's elite at something. I feel like everybody above him offers elite in terms of Altuve. They all offer something that they are really good at. Below LeMahieu, nobody offers anything that they are amazing at that a guy that you get around later or either side of them isn't good enough at. I feel like with LeMahieu, he is your last chance to lock in seriously good average at this position. So if you've taken some gambles early on and you've got some guys who are power or steals but deplete your average, LeMahieu's a great way to lock in a 300 average. He'll give you close to 10-10. If you believe the 26 numbers, he'll get you 10-10. If you believe the 27 numbers, he'll leave you a few short, but he'll get you close, and that's important. And that's why I think he's a guy that you know will play every day and go for. I'm not convinced I will draft DJ LeMahieu in many drafts. I feel like I'm going to get one of my top 7 and probably end up shying away from LeMahieu in terms of a particular specialist. But then again, maybe I'll finally learn from my lesson and prioritize some average once in a draft. So I just feel like he's a good name to have circled on your list in case you're short of average. He's a guy that can jump you back up without having to pay a huge cost.
Yeah, I don't know. He's a guy that doesn't excite me at all.
No.
I like the guy. He would be in my second group before he wouldn't be in my top 8. On my rankings, actually, I have Rugnedo Dor, who we'll talk about in the next episode, just because of what he does. But if he hit 348, I would be okay. Lock him in towards that top. But he's a guy that I think is closer to 300 than he is to 348. And when he's giving you 10-10 and playing Coors, like I don't know, it doesn't get me very excited. So, but I definitely see it, and I know that's as the consensus rankings show us, he's in the top 8 as well. So, it'll be interesting to kind of target him and see where he's coming off the board. All right, Ben, this is a lot of fun. Obviously, good talking our top guys at second base. Like we mentioned, we will be back to break down the rest of the second baseman. Where is their value? Where can you get guys with steals or power or some combination of both? If you missed our first base podcast, make sure you go back and check those out. Make sure you go to fakepigskin.com. All of Ben's rankings for points and Roto League are going up there, as well as we're doing a Make the Case series all through the preseason, talking all kinds of stuff. We talked about guys that could challenge Paul Goldschmidt at first base. We talked about Reese Hoskins versus Greg Bird, who we like better. We'll have more coming for each position preview, and all kinds of stuff as the season approaches. So if you have a debate that you need settled, send it to us. Let us know at FP or at Notorious KRO at BenRolf15. Send us in the DMs. We could always do an article or discuss it on the podcast and help you get some answers. So for Ben Rolfe, I'm Kyle Robert, and we'll talk to you guys next time.